A painful moment may last 10 minutes, but how does the mind keep it alive for 10 hours? The clock says the event is over. The mind says, yes, but what did it mean? What should I have said? What will happen next? And so the 10 minutes are stretched, copied, carried forward. There is chronological time in which the thing occurred once, and psychological time in which it occurs again and again. Someone makes a sharp remark to you in the morning. The words themselves take perhaps 5 seconds. Yet they sit beside you at breakfast. They follow you into the office. By lunchtime, you are conducting an imaginary trial, presenting evidence to a jury that does not exist. In the evening, you invent the perfect reply. And in bed, you replay the whole performance, only now with improved dialogue, a more satisfying ending, and considerably less sleep. Now, this does not mean the hurt was imaginary. The remark may have been cruel. A loss is a loss. Illness, danger, loneliness, and conflict cannot be dismissed as mere thinking. Some circumstances require grief. Others require treatment, protection, a boundary, or decisive action. We are not trying to become stones. A stone cannot be wounded, but neither can it love. What we are noticing is that there may be two problems where we ordinarily see one. The first is what happened, or what is happening. The second is the mind's struggle with the fact that it happened at all. The resisting, judging, predicting, rehearsing, and insisting that reality must somehow undo itself before we can be at peace. And here is the curious part. The mind prolongs the pain while attempting to get rid of it. It squeezes the experience to force an answer from it, rather as one might squeeze water in an effort to hold it still. The tighter the grip, the greater the disturbance. If you can notice these two layers, even briefly, pain and its continuation no longer form one solid, immovable block. A little space appears, not indifference, not passivity, but room to respond. So before we examine the commentary, we must ask, what exactly deserves to be called the first problem? So the first problem is not a theory about what has happened. It is the thing itself, as plainly as you can meet it. There is a pain in the chest, someone you love is gone, the rent is due, a promise has been broken, the room is unsafe, a conversation must be had, a choice must be made, a wound must be treated. These are not philosophical decorations. They are life presenting you with a fact. And a fact, before the mind explains it, is often remarkably specific. There is pressure behind the eyes, heat in the face, trembling in the hands. There is an empty chair where a familiar person once sat. There is a sentence someone actually spoke, a date printed on a bill, a consequence approaching because no decision has yet been made. The first problem has a certain shape. It may be painful, even devastating, but it is not vague. Now, we sometimes imagine that wisdom would make us less sensitive to such things, as though the enlightened person were a polished stone upon which nothing leaves a mark. But sensitivity is not a manufacturing error. The same openness by which you feel tenderness, delight, beauty, and affection is the openness by which you feel grief, fear, and separation. You cannot close the window against sorrow without also dimming the light. Consider music. Suppose you hear one note that pleases you enormously, and you say, "That is the note, keep it." So the musician holds it and holds it, refusing the next tone because the next tone would mean losing this one. Very soon there is no melody at all, only a noise being preserved beyond its life. The pleasure belonged to movement, and movement includes arrival and departure. In much the same way, to become invulnerable would not be to perfect life, but to reduce it. The armor that keeps out grief also keeps out intimacy. It blunts pain, certainly, but it blunts wonder, curiosity, humor, and love along with it. One becomes safer by becoming less alive. Acceptance, then, does not mean approving of everything. It means seeing accurately enough to respond. Pain may be tended. Illness may require treatment. Injustice may be opposed. A boundary may be drawn, grief may be expressed, and the unpaid bill must still be dealt with. To acknowledge the rain is not to endorse the weather. It is how you remember to open the umbrella. So, when difficulty appears, try asking gently, without turning it into an examination, what is the actual fact requiring attention now, apart from every explanation surrounding it? Once that immediate fact becomes visible, we can begin to see the additional burden the mind quietly builds around it. And this additional burden arrives so quickly that it is mistaken for part of the event. The fact may be they did not answer my message, but almost at once the mind adds, they are avoiding me. I have done something wrong. People always leave. I shall be alone. Within a few minutes, a silent telephone has become a complete philosophy of your unworthiness. Now, notice the movement. First comes resistance. This should not be happening. Then judgment. If it is happening, there must be something wrong with me. Then prediction. Because it is happening now, it will continue indefinitely. And finally, interpretation, the endless rearrangement of the past to prove that the verdict was correct all along. The mind becomes an extraordinarily industrious detective. It remembers a distracted expression from last Tuesday, an awkward pause from 6 months ago, a disappointment from childhood, and lays them all upon the table as evidence. Then it imagines tomorrow's conversation, next year's loneliness, and an entire future built around a message that may simply not have been seen. It writes the tragedy, casts the actors, rehearses the dialogue, and suffers through opening night before the other person has even returned from lunch. Each conclusion feels like information. That is what makes the process convincing. Yet much of it is not new information at all. It is the original alarm being sounded in different words. The body tightens, the mind interprets the tightness as proof of danger, and that interpretation tightens the body again. Round and round it goes, each echo claiming to be a fresh voice. There is an important difference between naming an experience and turning it into an identity. To say sadness is here can help you recognize what is happening. To say, I am unwanted, I am ruined, this is what I am, takes a moving condition and fastens it to your name. One is a description of weather. The other declares that you have become the climate. And so a person may be injured once by what occurred, then injured repeatedly by the insistence that it must not belong to their life. The mind says, this should never have happened, and because it did happen, reality is forced to stand trial every morning. Try, if you can, to listen for certain words. Always, never, should, ruined, forever, this is who I am. They are not wicked words, and there is no need to police them. Simply hear them as little bells, announcing that experience may be hardening into a story. Once heard in this way, the second problem is no longer an unquestionable verdict. It is a process resistance becoming judgment, judgment becoming prediction, prediction becoming identity. And every process can be observed while it is moving. But this story draws its greatest power from a remarkable human ability, the ability to leave the immediate moment and travel through time. This ability is not a mistake. Memory and foresight are among the mind's most useful instruments. Because you remember the burned hand, you need not touch the stove again. Because you can imagine winter, you store food, repair the roof, and look after those who depend upon you. The question is not whether to remember or predict, but whether these powers are serving life or replacing it. Suppose you have a difficult medical appointment next week. There are sensible things to do. You arrange transport, write down your questions, gather the relevant information, and tell someone you may need support. That is anticipation doing its proper work. But once these preparations are complete, the mind may continue holding the appointment every afternoon. It imagines the waiting room, the expression on the doctor's face, the worst possible news, and then the consequences of news that has not been given. You attend the appointment 100 times before attending it once. Nothing further has been prepared. Only fear has been rehearsed. Memory behaves in the same fashion. You may recall an injury in order to learn from it, recognize a pattern, or establish a boundary now. But when the scene is replayed, without yielding new understanding or action, the past borrows the body of the present. The old words are spoken again in today's nervous system. Today's jaw tightens. Today's stomach contracts. Today's sleep is lost. You see, the future never appears as the future. It appears now as an image. And the past never returns as the past. It appears now as a memory. Both are present activities of the mind, and they can become so vivid that the room around you fades, the taste of the meal, the voice of a friend, the rise and fall of breathing, all unnoticed, because consciousness is elsewhere. It is rather like spending years preparing for an honored guest. You polish the silver, rearrange the furniture, consult the calendar, and peer continually down the road. Then the guest arrives, sits in your house, and finds you still at the window looking for him. A habit of living ahead does not end merely because tomorrow becomes today. It simply invents another tomorrow. Presence, therefore, does not mean throwing away the calendar or pretending consequences do not exist. It means using thought at the time. Thought is useful, then returning the tool to the bench when its work is done. After thinking about another time, you might ask, what has become clearer or actionable in this one? If there is an answer, thought has served you. If there is none, psychological time may simply be multiplying pain without increasing preparedness. Yet even when we recognize this, the mind devises a new assignment for itself. Think harder, think deeper, think until the feeling disappears. And this is where the mind performs one of its cleverest tricks. It says, I feel anxious. There must be a reason. I must discover the reason so that I can stop feeling anxious. Then, after a few minutes, why have I not discovered it? Why can I not stop? Am I examining this correctly? What is wrong with me? And why am I now anxious about being anxious? Before long, one feeling has acquired a committee. The investigator, the supervisor, the critic, and the patient are all speaking with the same inner voice. Each new official is appointed to control the last one, but then someone must supervise the supervisor, evaluate the evaluator, and decide whether the decider is making progress. There is no end to it, because the instrument being used to escape the commentary is more commentary. Imagine a glass of muddy water. You would like it to become clear, so you take a spoon and stir vigorously to help the mud settle. When this fails, you stir more intelligently. You alter the speed, reverse direction, study the little clouds, and wonder why the water is so uncooperative. Yet the activity intended to produce clarity is precisely what keeps the mud suspended. Now, reflection is not the same as this recursive stirring. Reflection may reveal an insight, lead to a decision, suggest a conversation, or produce an experiment. Perhaps I need rest. Perhaps I should ask what was meant. Perhaps this situation resembles an old pattern, and a different response is possible. Reflection goes somewhere. Recursion returns to the feeling and asks, are you gone yet? That question alone can keep distress at the center of attention. If you check every minute to see whether fear has disappeared, every minute you are also asking whether danger remains. The inspection becomes a tiny alarm bell. Still afraid, still afraid, still afraid. And then, naturally, you become concerned about the disappointing results of your relaxation. There is something gently comic about ordering yourself to relax with clenched teeth, becoming furious that anger has not left, or lying awake worried about how badly worry is affecting your sleep. But the comedy is compassionate, because nearly everyone does this. We turn peace into a task and then wonder why it feels like work. Analysis is not the enemy. It becomes troublesome when it carries a hidden demand. This feeling has no right to be here, and thought must remove it before life can continue. Under that demand, even wise inquiry becomes resistance wearing spectacles. So, the first release may not be release from anxiety, grief, or anger. It may be release from the immediate demand that the feeling must leave. The water may still be cloudy, but the spoon can be put down. That is not intellectual defeat. It is a different relationship to what is present. And if thought is sometimes a useful tool and sometimes merely a wheel spinning in mud, we need a practical way to tell the difference. The distinction can begin with one modest question. Is this thought producing a possible step, a clearer understanding, or a necessary decision, or is it merely repeating the state I am already in? Clear problem solving tends to be specific. It says, this is the difficulty. These are the facts I know. These are the facts I do not know. Here are 2 or 3 possible responses, and this is the next one I can try. Then, having reached the edge of what can presently be done, it stops. It does not demand omniscience as the entrance fee for action. Rumination behaves quite differently. It moves from the specific to the universal. Why does everything go wrong? Why am I always like this? How can I guarantee this will never happen again? It replays the same scene, demands an answer no one could possess, and leaves you no more prepared than before, only more exhausted. It creates motion without movement, rather like running furiously on a wheel and congratulating oneself on the mileage. Suppose you were worried about your health. Calling the clinic and making an appointment is a step. Imagining every diagnosis is a repetition of fear. If you have hurt someone, drafting an honest apology is a step. Prosecuting yourself until 3 in the morning does not repair the relationship. If money is tight, reviewing expenses and asking what can change is a step. Transforming the figures into proof that you are a failure adds shame to arithmetic. And sometimes, no action is possible at this moment. The office is closed. The other person is unavailable. More information will not arrive until Friday. Then a second question becomes useful. When does action become possible? And can this matter be set down until then? To set it down does not mean pushing it into a cellar and pretending it is gone. It means declining to use thought where thought has no work to do. You would not keep sawing after the board had been cut, merely because the saw is an excellent tool. Nor must the next step always be taken alone. It may be to speak honestly with someone, to sleep before deciding, to seek professional care, to document what occurred, or to ask for practical help. Intelligent action includes recognizing when your own resources are not the only resources available. Try this distinction lightly. If you begin checking every 30 seconds, am I ruminating now? Was that useful? Am I doing this correctly? The examiner has simply put on a new hat. The point is not to monitor thought perfectly. It is to notice, now and then, whether thought is opening a door or walking you around the same room. That preserves the mind as an instrument without allowing it to become the weather it describes. But beneath all this spinning lies a subtle attention. The feeling is treated as an invader, and the self as something standing apart from it. We usually speak as though there were 2 occupants inside us. One is frightened, sad, angry, or ashamed, and the other stands over it with folded arms saying, "You must stop this at once." So fear is afraid, and then the controller is afraid of fear. Anger appears, and then another anger arrives to condemn the first. A small civil war begins inside a single organism. But where, exactly, is this independent commander? If you look closely, you do not find a separate manager floating above experience. You find another thought saying, "I must control this," perhaps accompanied by a clenched jaw, a lifted chest, a knot between the shoulders. The controller is not outside the disturbance. It is one more movement within it. It is like one hand gripping the other while demanding that the whole body relax. The struggle is perfectly real, the pressure, the strain, the fatigue, but the division between the gripping side and the gripped side exists chiefly in the story. Both hands belong to the same body. Now, this does not mean that every impulse must be obeyed. To feel anger does not require you to strike. To feel fear does not mean every alarm is accurate. Non-division is not the abandonment of judgment or restraint. It is the recognition that the feeling, the awareness of the feeling, the body and the response are all closed within one living process. Discernment can happen without inventing a little tyrant behind the eyes. So, instead of arguing with the word fear, try, if you can, to meet its texture. There may be a tightness in the throat, a quickened breath, a hollow sensation in the stomach, restless energy in the arms. These are immediate events. They move, pulse, gather, and loosen. The label makes them sound like one solid object. Attention discovers many changing sensations. And when these sensations are directly felt, the organism is given a chance to respond as a whole. Breath adjusts. Muscles reveal where they are braced. The need for action becomes clearer, or the absence of action becomes tolerable. But if every sensation triggers another attempt to flee the sensation, the alarm is continually renewed. The body feels fear, then feels the struggle against fear, and cannot easily distinguish one warning from the next. Here is the reversal. A feeling often becomes less imprisoning when it is no longer required to leave before life may continue. You can feel the trembling and still make tea. You can carry grief and answer the door. You can be uncertain and take the next honest step. To allow experience does not mean resigning yourself to every external condition. It means participating completely in what is already here, so that your response comes from contact rather than inner warfare. Acceptance is intimate, not indifferent. But an insight is easy while listening, and elusive when the telephone rings, the argument begins, or the old fear returns. So this must become something you can try in the middle of an ordinary difficult moment. So here is something you might try, not as a method for manufacturing calm, and certainly not as another examination in which the spiritual student receives a passing grade. If you use it to force yourself into peace, the old controller has merely acquired incense. The point is simpler. To meet the first problem without building a house around it. When distress appears, pause just long enough to ask what is actually here. What is being sensed? What has factually occurred? And what is being predicted, interpreted, or concluded? Perhaps there is pressure across the chest, heat in the face, and the fact that someone ended a conversation abruptly. The prediction that the relationship is destroyed is something else. It may feel persuasive, but it has not yet happened. Then give the immediate experience a small, concrete name: pressure, trembling, grief, uncertainty, anger. Keep the name close to the sensation. Do not ask it to write your biography. Anger is here, describes this moment. I have always been broken, tries to turn the moment into a lifetime. Next, ask whether the first problem requires action now. You may need to leave an unsafe place, make a call, drink water, rest, apologize, gather information, set a boundary, or simply complete the next physical task. If action is possible, take only the step that is actually available. The whole future need not be solved before you move one foot. Then notice the familiar second problem phrases as they pass through. This should not be happening. I ought to be better than this. It will always be this way. There is no need to debate them. An argument with every thought is merely more thought. Recognize them as present mental events, words, images, forecasts, not commands engraved upon reality, and return gently to something you have not manufactured: the weight of the body in the chair, the sound in the room, breath moving without instruction, the next motion of the hands, not to drive pain away, simply to include the rest of the moment that pain had hidden. Suppose an argument has ended for the evening. Your shoulders are raised, your stomach is tight, and the mind is preparing its midnight courtroom. Feel the charge. Decide whether a useful conversation is possible now. If it is not, choose a time to speak tomorrow. Perhaps write down the one point that matters, and allow the imaginary trial to adjourn. The discomfort may remain, but it need not employ the entire night. The result is not necessarily serenity. Sometimes the honest result is pain without additional accusation, uncertainty without prophecy, grief without a verdict on your future. That is already a profound reduction of unnecessary struggle. Yet a practice this subtle is easily misunderstood, especially when the first problem is not a passing mood, but real harm, deep grief, or a condition that lasts. The objection is important. If you stop resisting what is happening, do you not become passive before illness, injustice, exploitation, or loss? Does acceptance mean standing still while harm continues? No. To acknowledge a condition inwardly is not to consent to it outwardly. In fact, you cannot intelligently change what you refuse to admit is already here. You cannot leave a dangerous situation while insisting it cannot possibly be happening. You cannot treat an illness you will not name, grieve a loss you will not feel, or oppose an injustice you are too frightened to see clearly. Imagine discovering a fire in the kitchen. One response is to argue with the flames. This must not be happening. Why my kitchen? What does this say about me? Another is to see the fire and respond. Warn others, leave the room, call for help, use the extinguisher if it is safe. Acceptance is not sitting among the flames in a state of mystical approval. It is ending the debate about whether the fire exists so that your energy can meet the fire itself. And some first problems do not pass in an afternoon. They may require medicine, therapy, community, legal protection, financial planning, or the repeated setting of boundaries. This philosophy replaces none of that. Non-resistance is not a substitute for care. It is a way of meeting care without adding the demand that you should never have needed it. Because the second problem can attach itself even to responsible action. You seek help, then feel ashamed for needing help. You make a plan, then demand that the plan guarantee the future. You endure a difficult season, then conclude that the difficulty has permanently reduced your worth. The mind takes a wound and writes your identity inside it. Grief shows this very clearly. Grief is not evidence that you are failing to let go. It is love encountering absence. To allow grief is to honor that something mattered. But when the mind says, because life has changed, life can never contain meaning again, it has added a future that has not arrived. The sorrow is real. The prophecy is imagined. And if you understand this in yourself, you become more compassionate toward others. You do not tell a suffering person that their pain is merely a thought, because pain is not merely anything. You help with the first problem where you can, and you do not shame them for the second. Yielding inwardly can make action more exact. You stop spending strength arguing that reality should be elsewhere, and begin working with the situation actually under your hands. This is neither compliance nor numbness. It is clear participation. With that safeguard in place, the two-problem model can become more than an emergency measure. It can become a way of living. So we return to the question with which we began. How does 10 minutes of pain become 10 hours of suffering? Something happens. The body responds. Then the mind resists the response, judges the person having it, predicts how long it will last, searches the past for proof, and repeats the whole sequence until the body is alarmed once more. Event becomes sensation, sensation becomes story, story becomes renewed sensation. The wheel turns, and because every part of it is painful, it appears to be one continuous thing. But it is not quite one thing. The first problem is reality asking for contact or action. Feel this, see this, answer this, leave, speak, rest, grieve, decide, or wait. The second problem is thought insisting that reality must first become different before you are permitted to live within it. One responds to what is here. The other postpones life until what is here has gone. And, you see, the impermanence that makes us vulnerable is also what makes release possible. We cannot secure every pleasant moment and command it to remain. But neither can pain remain precisely what it was. Sensations shift, circumstances develop, understanding changes, and even grief has tides. To demand that nothing change would not preserve life. It would stop the movement by which life is alive. Think of weather passing over an open landscape. The land does not defeat the storm, nor does it cling to the clear afternoon that came before it. Rain falls, wind moves through the grass, clouds gather and separate. The landscape does not take one dark hour and declare, "This is what I am forever." The next time pain appears, you might ask, as lightly as possible, is there one problem here, or two? What needs attention, and what is being added? Then give the first problem what it honestly requires, without feeding the second with identity, permanence, and prophecy. And if resistance remains, if you find yourself insisting that you should already be better at acceptance, notice that too. Do not manufacture a third problem about failing to solve the second. Even resistance may be allowed to show itself without becoming your name. There is no promise here of permanent calm. Permanent calm would be another frozen note, another attempt to hold the music still. There is only the possibility of meeting what is real, acting where action is possible, and allowing a moment to end when it ends. For now, perhaps this sensation is enough, this decision is enough, this breath is enough, and this moment need not become anything else.